Hi, friends, and welcome to the Heartful Parent Podcast. I'm your host, Christy Keating. In this podcast, we talk about it all, our parenting, our partnering, and our professional lives, because they are all a part of us, and we were never meant to do this alone. Kim, I'm so thrilled to have you here. Welcome to the Heartful Parent Podcast.
Christy, I am thrilled to be here. Thank you.
You and I obviously have some similarities in our background, having both previously practiced as attorneys, and I know that will inform our conversation a little bit today, because, obviously we're talking about divorce, and which unfortunately is a reality for many parents. But having never practiced family law, it's certainly not my area of expertise. And it's not a personal experience that I've had either. So I'm really eager to gather your wisdom in this. I want to start or sort of jump in with something that I'm sure there are listeners that are thinking this themselves. I have had clients say this to me in my coaching practice, which is, in an ideal world, I would get divorced, for whatever reasons X, Y, and Z. But I'm staying with my partner for the benefit of our children. I'd love to hear a little bit about your thoughts on that. And I think you've got some personal experience with that sort of line of thought as well.
I do have the knowledge and the personal experience. And I didn't have the knowledge when I went through divorce. And I struggled with that too, thinking, I can't leave. Like, that's going to harm my kids. That's going to be the worst thing. And so it took a while, like years, really, for me to get to a point where it was like, no, it's actually harming my kids to stay. And that's when I asked my spouse to leave and figured out how to do it peacefully, because I was terrified of traditional divorce. I'd practiced family law. I wasn't going to do that to my kids, right? I even had clients fight over spices, right? They needed a mediator to
Wow.
distribute the spices. And it's like, no, like not just the expense, but I'd seen the trauma.
Yeah.
And what I discovered afterwards, ironically, was about adverse childhood experiences. And divorce is listed as an adverse childhood experience, right? And of course, those are events that can cause adverse health outcomes when you're older. Divorce is listed as one, but what the more recent research is it's conflict. So if you have a mom and a dad who are yelling all the time at each other, or frequently, the children don't just observe it, they take it in. And and so you see children acting out. And like some of the other adverse childhood experiences that we don't think about are, if a parent over imbibes a substance, mental health issues. Of course, you've got the verbal abuse, the emotional abuse, physical abuse, those ones. If a child witnesses one parent physically assault the other parent.
Mm-hmm.
And the tipping point is for ACEs. Like
Right.
over 60% of the population, and this was the CDC and Kaiser Permanente's research, over 60% of us have experienced one ACE. Over 12% have experienced 4.
Wow.
So for parents who there's, unresolved mental health issues, there's yelling, there's substance abuse, divorce could actually be a really, really good outcome for your kids, depending on how it's done. And
Yeah.
that's certainly what I saw. I didn't know that at the time, but my son was afraid of his dad. And I had this goal. I wanted my kids to have the best relationship possible with their dad. Right?
Yeah.
I had, yeah. So, and it was really a remarkable journey to see what happened with my son, because I was sure he was going to end up in jail. You know how attorneys think it's worst possible
Yes.
outcomes. And
Yes.
his behavior was atrocious at school. And I was sure, oh, as a teenager, he's going to be in jail. And that wasn't the outcome. He learned resilience. And once he got out of that conflict, and it wasn't that his dad and I didn't fight, but it was this heavy, heavy tension.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I know there are parents listening to this who live in that heavy tension on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And there are also those parents who are in the yelling, the overt sort of yelling, fighting.
Hmm.
What's remarkable to me about that story, um, and maybe leads into my next question is, when you decided that divorce was actually going to be the right outcome, the better outcome. And although it can be an adverse childhood experience, the other things that were happening in place of it were heavier, right? Or
Hmm.
were also adverse childhood experiences, and maybe more a higher number of them, right? Than just divorce. But you said that you decided that you wanted that divorce to happen in a healthy or amicable way, which I mean, I think is certainly for most of us as we think about the concept of divorce, not necessarily in our own relationships, but maybe in our own relationships, that like a collaborative, cooperative, amicable divorce where the kids are put first is the ideal. And I guess a question might be is if you are the partner who would like that, you want the divorce, but you also want to keep it kind. How do you manage when your partner is not of the same mindset?
Well, I mean, like my husband wanted to stay married.
Okay.
So, right? Because for religious reasons, he didn't believe in divorce. And he'd even asked me early on, Kim, do I still have a chance? And and I'm thinking, no. But, I had seen just about everything in my legal practice. And I'm like, well, anything's possible. And then I sent him an email where I said, I am 98% certain that we are done. How could you put that in an email? That is so cruel, Kim. And I think really what happened was I didn't run to a lawyer. We did not engage, because there's a finality that the person who wants to stay married, who, right, doesn't have a chance to catch up if you run to a lawyer right away.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the benefit of knowing what the causes of action were to consider. But really, they're just life questions, like where are we going to live? How are we going to share our property? Like what's going to happen to the house? Where are the kids going to live? How are we going to afford to have our child continue to take music lessons or cheer or hockey?
What's
They're
going to
just,
happen to the spice drawer?
yes, right? It's
Yeah.
just, they're just life questions. And so, how I actually approached it was I came up with this is what, and I didn't say, our son's afraid of you. It wasn't negative. I'd actually gone through some questions and thought about it, about, we haven't been happy for a long time. And I shared with him one of my best memories from our time together
Mm-hmm.
and then acknowledged, so I was acknowledging you're somebody who's important in my life and I appreciate you. And we haven't had any experiences like that in a long time. Our children deserve better.
Mm-hmm.
We're actually harming them by staying together, and it's going to be healthier um, for you to move out.
Okay. I love, I just, love the idea of that in the process of this conversation, one, that you gave him time to kind of catch up with where you were. Two, that you didn't run to a lawyer right away. That's the giving him time. But
Hmm.
the acknowledging that that at one point this was a relationship that was fun and that there were wonderful experiences, and then sort of painting the contrast that that's not where, where we are right now. um I can hear parents still sort of listening to this and saying, well, that's great, Kim, that worked for you. Like you gave your husband time to catch up, and he did, right? And he didn't get you know super there wasn't a ton of animosity or anger or unproductive things that grew out of that. And so I could hear someone saying, well, how do I make sure that happens? But also, if that's the way the divorce is going to be, right? If the divorce is not going to be amicable, aren't my kids just better off in the home with both of us?
No, absolutely not. No, and I'm not being facetious in saying that. And the reality is, like, I came across when I was doing my master's, because this was part of me reclaiming me after divorce. And I got a job with a couple profs as their research assistant on collaborative conflict resolution in business and commercial disputes. I came across an article, Jim Golden was the lead author out of the Harvard Law Negotiation Review. And it was about trucking companies and, um, when somebody's killed in an accident with one of their trucks. And you and I both know that in a situation like that, the defendant, the owner of the truck, sits back and waits for the claim to be issued
Mhm.
and then doesn't voluntarily share information. What this trucking company did instead was they added empathy. So before the person was buried, they were on the phone to the funeral home saying, this is horrendous. We want to show the family support. Can you check with them? We would like to have a representative at the funeral.
Wow.
And then it was, who do we talk to? Who can represent the family? We need to have some discussions. And one of the first things they talked about was, we know you're not going to be able to function for 6 months because this is so horrendous. How much money do you need to get you through the next 6 months? No strings attached. Let us know. We will write the check. And then it was, here's the driver's abstract. Here's the truck's mechanical records, all before a claim had been issued, and asking, what other information do you need?
Wow.
That trucking company reduced their insurance premiums by $1 million a year by treating people as human beings who deserving of respect and compassion,
Mhm.
which is essentially what I did, not knowing what I was doing, but it's what I did with my former spouse. And if you can add that into the mix, because the interesting thing I see all the time in my mediation practice is you get people remembering, oh, yeah, we have kids. And the kids are always some of their best memories.
Mhm.
All of a sudden, oh, yeah, we're on the same page. We want the best for our children. And parents can actually do, we'd step, I don't know about you, but I would step in front of a truck if it meant saving my kids.
100%. Yep.
And so it's the kids are the key, the glue to having things go well. And there's a certain amount of, and the thing is, of course, historically, something bad had to have happened for divorce,
Right.
right? And the model, at least, I don't know what it is in the States, but in the British Commonwealth, it was divorce became a creature of the court system in 1857. And you really, really had to be something bad. Well, with no fault divorce, who cares? And you
Right.
can't change the past. So we stop bringing out the best in each other. That doesn't mean, like we can switch jobs now. Nobody used to switch jobs. You and I would still be working as attorneys,
Yeah. Yeah.
desperately unhappy, stressed out, sick. Nobody thinks twice now about, switching jobs. And
Right.
there's about 40% of marriages in the United States end in divorce. And there's over 5.8 million kids who have divorced parents in the United States. Like it's very, very common.
Yeah.
It's just in our heads. And it's interesting. Like in addition to the mediation, I work and I'm answering, what do you do if your spouse doesn't want to do this?
Yeah.
Right? Like I'll coach people who want to get divorced who have the super controlling spouse. And I have a group program as well. But it's way interesting because when you have a super controlling spouse and they need to win, well, you don't think that you're going to get justice in the court system. They're just going to grind you down. So
Yeah.
it's like, okay, they need to win. Okay. But how do we turn you into winning to them into winning too?
Right.
And that's all how you communicate with them. And and a lot of women think with divorce, and I think this is where the bad rap comes from. Well, I'm just going to be reasonable. And then he'll be reasonable. No, 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 no. When he has to win, he has to grind you down. So if you start with where you think is reasonable, you're really going to be taken to the cleaners.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's helping people with the strategy. And I mean, mediation didn't work for my spouse and I, my first husband and I. I didn't feel heard there. I was just angry, so I ended mediation, and I still figured out how to do it peacefully.
Wow.
And yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm like having not personally been in the situation of, needing or wanting to go through this, it's and hearing frankly nightmare stories. We
Mhm.
as lawyers, we know nightmare stories, and probably personally we've heard those stories as well. I've also heard them from my clients, and it's just so refreshing to kind of think about the idea that we can do this in a peaceful, collaborative way, even with a spouse who may err on the contentious side or the need to win. So it's not, what I'm hearing you say, Kim, is that this isn't about just sort of letting them bulldoze over you and letting them win at all cost. It's
Mhm.
all about in how the communication, the wording, the approach, and the priorities, right? The kids, as you said, it's all in how you sort of manage those pieces that can make it a more of a win-win situation instead of just a win.
And I think when we first split up, my former spouse, and I don't refer to him as my ex anymore because former spouse is kinder,
Hmm.
right? So my former spouse, the kids were 2.5 and 7.5. He would come here to bathe them and put them to bed. It started out 6 nights a week. That was too much for me. Um, like it was, so I decreased it to 5 nights a week. And it wasn't until our son started talking to me about his dad that I was, honey, do you want to spend more time with dad? Yeah, mom, I do. And this from the kid, I had a conference to go to in Vancouver about 3 weeks after I asked um, my spouse to move out. And I asked my son, I said, honey, do you want dad to come and stay with you or do you want to go to grandma's? Well, grandma lives lived 200 miles away. And he said, grandma's, right? He wasn't real comfortable spending time with his dad.
Uh-huh.
But they were able to build that relationship in a way that worked for them. right? Like over time.
Right.
And and I mean, my son is like the most resilient person I know. You know, he could have, when he finished his last year of university, he did it in French.
Wow.
He hadn't studied French in 9 years, but he immersed himself. He'd done 2 classes at university and then immersed himself in it for 2 semesters. And he had a chair at the symphony. And, his profs were like, you got to go do your master's. And he's saying to me, Mom, music isn't fun anymore. I'm going to take some time off. I'm not going to do my master's. And to have the self-confidence to know what he wants, I'm like, wow, wow.
Yeah.
So and don't get me wrong, I was not a nice person. I was extremely controlling. And my first thought actually was, oh, I'm going to go to court and so that he can't have the kids. And then I said to myself, Kim, get real. And this is where the legal knowledge came into effect. You have never said you have any concerns about his parenting to anybody. And for you to take it to court now, well, you know what a judge would do with that, right? They'd be
Right.
going, Ms. Korven, you're just trying to gain advantage. You're wasting our time. Get out of here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was like, suck it up, Kim. You're like, nobody's going to save you here.
Hmm.
And I think there's a thought that, oh, I'm not getting along with this person. I don't want to talk with this person. So I'll just hire an attorney and they can talk to this person. But it doesn't resolve anything.
It's not often that you have somebody with a legal background say, don't talk to a lawyer, right? Right. Start with the communication directly, without using that sort of third party to go through, is what I'm hearing you say.
Well, and even like ended up drafting my own separation agreement about a year and a half after we'd separated. And when I took it to a lawyer for independent legal advice, she had a fit because I didn't mention custody. I just said I was the primary caregiver. And she's like, you are opening yourself up to so much trouble, right? And we went back and forth. I
Hmm.
shared why it had to be this way. And I knew in my gut that if I had included custody in that agreement, we would have been fighting in court for 5 years.
Mm.
I knew that. And so I finally said to her, can't you just prepare a letter for me to sign that says I'm signing this against your best professional advice and that I can never sue you? She didn't want to do it, but she did it. And I can still remember signing that and being so mad. And I thought, I understand the system. I'm part of it. I understand the risks. And you're making me feel like I'm 8 years old,
Yeah.
like I can't trust myself. And I thought, if you're not part of the legal system, you're just going to cave and go, well, because you feel like a failure when you're
Right.
going through this. And your whole world has been just ripped apart. And that's true even if you're doing it peacefully.
Yeah.
So the inclination is I'll just do what this expert I'm paying tells me to do.
Hmm.
And lawyers have a role. And the role it's like when somebody dies, you don't run to the lawyer right away. You honor the person first. And the end of a marriage is like a death. So you honor that, you get your feet under you, and then you can have better conversations with your attorney, right?
Yeah.
You're better able to meld your inner knowing and the legal knowledge. You'll make better decisions.
I love that idea of honoring it, that it's like a death. It is the death of the marriage, and that if you pause and can honor that, and the person or the people that made up that marriage, that it puts you in a better place to then think rationally and productively through the decisions you have to make.
And like I wasn't kind. I threw out his beer bottle collection, because he wouldn't take it from the house. He would collect a beer bottle from every place he went to, and he wouldn't take this box, right? So I was not, I was not a saint. It was not Saint Kim. It was really, really challenging, and it was way rewarding, and it created space for all of us to thrive and be better human beings
Yeah.
because we split up.
Well, and it sounds like it also enabled your son, so not just you and your former spouse to be better human beings, but for your son to have a connection with his dad in a way that wasn't happening with
Mhm.
his dad in the home. Yeah.
Very, very true. And the same with our daughter.
So I'm curious, Kim, for people that are on the fence, maybe they've heard, they're listening to this, they've heard what you've said, and they understand the, adverse childhood experiences, and um that it can be equally, or perhaps in many cases more traumatic for a child to grow up in a home where there's tension and anger and yelling, or whatever the
Mhm.
landscape looks like. um but obviously that's not every marriage that comes to an end. um and so for somebody who's listening and saying there's not really tension, there's not really yelling, there's no violence, there's no manipulation. We're just not in love with each other anymore, but we function well as roommates and co-parents and whatever. How does one evaluate whether or not separation and divorce will be healthier for the children, or if it's a situation where, and is there a situation where the kids are just, or everybody's just sort of better off sticking it out? Because I can hear that question coming from listeners.
Well, it's interesting, and I guess it's what kind of an example do you want to set to your children? Because it isn't just right, like, and I'm a child of parents who stayed together who likely should have divorced, and the impact on my self-worth and everything,
Hmm.
right? Which I didn't see at the time, but I put the pieces together now. And what it does is you learn to settle. And I think about me, like I ended up getting really sick at one of my jobs because I didn't fit. I was just settling. That was the example I grew up with. You just soldier on and it's okay. It's not bad. It's not great. It's not bad. It's not great. It's okay. And there's some good things and there's some bad things. But it's that example. And if we really genuinely want the best, like for our kids to grow up to be healthy, resilient human beings, I think that's where the rubber hits the road. Because, when I went to law school, my initial thought was I was going to go to Scotland and do my master's. But my mentors said, "Oh, Kim, you need to practice for a couple years. You need that experience." Well, I didn't trust my inner knowing enough, because when you grow up in that space, to do what I knew was best for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had this 25-year career where I was constantly, shifting to try to really feel like I belonged. So I think that's the danger. And the thing is about I think I'm fortunate that one of the first divorces I ever heard about was a relative of my dad's, and he and his wife, when they decided to separate, they kept the house and they got an apartment and they went back and forth. And the kids stayed in the house,
I've heard of that. Yeah.
right? So it wasn't this heavy duty conflict. And, if because often what happens when you don't live together, you can get along better too, like when
Right.
it's just kind of okay. But it shows the kids, oh, I actually have a happy mom and a happy dad versus, okay, versus this kind of like, yeah, we're just going through the motions. Well, and there's something else that's always interesting is we tend to beat ourselves up like, oh, I should be doing this, or maybe I should stay or go. It's okay wherever you are. It's not a light switch, right? I was 3 years going back and forth. Do I stay? Do I go? Um, some people who I've worked with, it's been 10 years, right? It is okay. And if you choose to stay, like some of the people I work with in mediation actually have a better conversation and decide to stay together. That makes me happy. I'm about happy kids because if kids are in a home where their parents feel fulfilled and there's space to actually show up as themselves, it sets an example for the children to do that too, which means a far better world.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, wouldn't it be something like, I talk about a number of different things in my work of things that we could, if we all did, would change the entire cultural narrative.
Mhm.
And it strikes me that this is one of them, that if our children grew up watching, whether it is in a divorced, family or an intact family, that if our children grew up with parents who were self-fulfilled and had found their own joy and their own identity, that would give our children permission to do the same, and they would go out into the world in such a healthier, better way. And yet, whether it's sort of saying I'm going to stay in it for the kids, or I'm not going to go out with my friends or have my own thing for the kids, we're modeling that idea of we sacrifice everything for them, but then that teaches them to sacrifice everything for someone else. Um,
Exactly.
yeah.
And
So, oh, go
and
ahead.
well, and just, and a lot of it revolves around communication. We never learned how to communicate in high school, how to have those difficult conversations. And in law school, it's court, like that is the best. And I remember like my first ever trial, it was small claims. And this fellow had built a fence. He owned the mobile home that was on this lot. It was a rented, but it was on rented property. He built a fence on the lot, and the deal with the landowner was they would reimburse him for the cost of the materials, and he would donate his labor. He built the fence, they refused to pay. So, of course, we go to trial. They bring a board from the fence with a knot hole in it to show, oh, this is inferior lumber. And there's baby lawyer Kim going, how am I going to deal with this? But the court found for my client, and I'm ecstatic, only the court didn't award him the taxes he'd paid to purchase the lumber, right? And I'm ecstatic. Look at this. The justice system is working. And then I talked to my client, and he's angry over that tax money. He's wanting to appeal. And I'm like, what is going on here? Like, we won. This is the system working. This impartial judge heard the evidence and made a decision. How can you be unhappy? And it ended up a few weeks later, because every time we talked, he was upset. And I thought about it. And I said to him in our first conversation, he had told me his daughter and grandkids lived in that trailer.
Mhm.
So I asked him, why did you build the fence? Mm-hmm. And I said, wasn't it to keep your grandchildren safe? Because he'd also told me it was a busy street. And he was, yes, it was. In the course of going to court, he had completely lost track of what was most important to him. It all got caught up in the legal language, the legal issues. Keeping his grandchildren safe played no part in this dispute. But as soon as he reattached to what was important, he was fine with the decision.
Interesting.
And it taught me that, oh, yes, even if you win, you're not happy. Like it isn't framed in a way that honors you and your situation. And that's the other benefit of staying away from lawyers at the front end. You frame it in a way that's important to you. And gets back to the, we're not trained in how to resolve conflict. We'll get trained. Because it usually isn't personal. And that's something I do with my mediation clients. When they're complaining about the other person, I'm like, does she do this with other people?
Mm-hmm.
Like, does she have trouble admitting she was wrong with other people? And with dancing around and not saying she did something when other people might judge her about it? Oh, yeah. Well, so it's not personal.
Yep. Yep. Yes.
Right?
Such
And yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, it's just such an important thing to remember. What I appreciate about that sort of framing of this, of all of it, and you're right, like it applies in so many different situations, right? Whether we're talking about a fence that's keeping someone's
mhm,
grandchildren safe, or we're in the midst of a divorce, is that when we come back to the why, right? What really matters. And obviously, when we are divorcing and children are in the picture, I recognize they aren't always, um, but when we're divorcing and children are in the picture, the message that's coming through so loudly and clearly from you, Kim, is that we need to keep them at the center, the
mhm,
why at the center,
yeah,
um, so that they can grow up healthier and happier,
yeah,
and those aces, that we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, don't have the same weight and impact, um, and it also helps us kind of see our way through some of the things that otherwise might feel really sticky or contentious, like the spice drawer. I'm still giggling about that people were arguing about the spices, but
20 years later, I remember it because it's so absurd,
yeah, yeah,
right? And you're right. And if we keep what's most important, and the system isn't designed to keep the kids front and center. So it's up to the people involved to do it. Because the system will tear the why right out of their minds.
yeah. That feels like, frankly, a really like some profound wisdom, that the system isn't designed to keep what matters, the why, at the front and center. And so it's up to us to do that. Kim, I know that you are no longer practicing law, and happily so, like me. And that you do now work with people who are experiencing or going through divorce. Where is the best place for folks to track you down and find the work that you do or connect with you?
So the most, and I offer a lot of free resources on my website because this is not something for people to just, oh, yeah, yeah, I'm, hear my name and go, yes. And it's part of the empowerment piece. So the website, theconflictqueen.ca. And on the first page, there's actually a link to get a flowchart on how to divorce peacefully.
Love
And
it.
I came across it a couple months ago. I wrote it up in, I think, 2016. And it was when I was thinking about how did I actually do it to explain to other people. So it's a really, really great outline that's free. There's also in the tools a very low cost divorce script, like those questions you need to ask yourself.
Yeah.
And then how to fit them into this script to have that conversation with your spouse.
Love it. We will make sure that your website and the access or the link for where they can get that those resources are in the show notes for this.
And the other thing I'm doing that I've just started doing, I'm in my 3rd month and it's so much fun, is I have a YouTube channel.
Oh, fabulous.
And mainly I'm doing shorts, so like, is it conflict or divorce that harms kids more? Let me know. And some pet pictures, for some strange reason with all my pets. But and I'm at 99 subscribers. So it's a wonky channel yet. Once you hit 100, I'm almost there. Okay. But it's Kim Korven 4520.
Okay. We will make sure that your YouTube channel is in the show notes as well. And people who are, listening to this and sort of recognizing that they are in the midst of, thinking about this, making decisions about this, but would like to gather some information and ideas and have some framework or a guideline here.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure that they know how to find you. Kim, thank you for reminding all of us that whether it's divorce or other conflict, there is often a more peaceful way forward if we commit to it and look for it. I'm grateful for your wisdom.
Well, I'm so grateful you had me for this conversation, because it's a really important message.
Yeah.
And this isn't about me. This is about helping kids. It's a really important message. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.